dear members of the European Academy of Sciences and Arts, and dear guests. Following what has become a good tradition, I would like to welcome you again to our series of events, Science Meets Arts, Arts Meets Science, the last event in this winter semester. The lecture series has been an extraordinary success. In the meantime, it can be said that members of the Academy and guests from all over the world, including outside Europe, have joined in. This is due to the obviously attractive combination of science and art. And as president of this Academy of Sciences and Arts, however, I would also like to emphasize that this is precisely our profile, which distinguishes us from other academies. In addition to Violeta Dinescu, I would like to thank Ioannis Liritzis, Dean of Class 4, as co-organizer this evening. As this is, we heard it already, is the last time he will be working in this function, in order to be able, I hope, to devote more time to other tasks in the Academy in the next semester. Many thanks, dear Ioannis, for your great commitment in setting up this lecture series. Our Dean of Class 2, Medicine, Dusan Shuput, will continue his work as co-organizer of this lecture series, perhaps with a different emphasis. Tonight's lecture from the natural sciences is about the world of nanostructures. The great American physics Nobel laureate Richard Feynman had already prophesied in 1960, quotation, "There is plenty of room at the bottom." We only ever see the vastness of space with its countless stars and galaxies. Feynman directed our gaze to the vast world of atoms and molecules, which, like galaxies, combine to form extremely complex structures. In the 1980s, Eric Drexler, the engineer and natural scientist, developed from this the vision of a nanotechnology in which new types of complex molecular structures can be assembled from material sciences to nowadays nanorobotics and even pharmacy. The mathematical basis is ultimately the science of complex systems, which I myself have dealt with in many books since the 1980s. The bridge to music is obvious and will be built tonight by a composer. Instead of molecular structures, it is about the emergence of complex tone and sound structures. They too can be synthesized with instruments similar to nanotechnology, but of course with other instruments. In the end, as the composer writes in her abstract, a natural organic nature with high density, and that means complexity, emerges. We are excited again and look forward to these contributions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Klaus. Also, I would like to welcome the Vice President of our Academy, Professor Brigitte Harris. Hello, Brigitte. Thank you very much for your support always.
Hello, Ioannis. Hello, Violeta. Thank you so much for the invitation to this last colloquium in January. And thank you so much, Ioannis, for your presence, for your excitement and all this. It was very, very fine to hear you. Thank you so much. Also to the speakers of today, it's very fine that you invite them. And now please go on. Thank you.
Thank you, Brigitte. Thank you. Violeta.
Wonderful. Thank you also. We are thanking, and thanking is like also a complex thanking system. I have the pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Charlotte Seither. She is a German classical composer. She was born in the Pfalz, and she studied in Berlin, where she also lives now. She has composed a wide range of orchestral, chamber, and vocal music, which was performed across Europe, Asia, Africa, America. After her first prize in the International Composition Contest, Prague Spring, which is a very famous competition, she received numerous invitations, Biennale in Venezia, Wien Modern, BBC Proms, and so on. At the International Society of Contemporary Music World Music Days in South Korea and New Zealand, Germany was represented by her music. As artist in residence, Charlotte Seither has been guest of international institutions, and she held a scholarship of the Villa Massimo in Rome. She was also resident at the Cité des Arts in Paris, in Venedig, in Johannesburg, and at the Villa Aurora in Los Angeles. She also received the Deutsche Musikautorenpreis in 2014 for the choir as well as contemporary music for choir. Charlotte is member of international boards and committees. In 2016, she was the first female composer entering the GEMA supervisory board, which was a really fantastic step in her career. Foundation and board member of the German Music Council. Besides, she is also board member of the German Composers League. Charlotte Seither has been granted numerous prizes and honors, such as the Rome Prize of the German Ministry of the Praetorius Music Prize. In 2020, she was awarded the Federal Cross Merit by the Federal Republic of Germany. I forgot to say that she had two wonderful teachers and composers, Aribert Reimann and Friedrich Goldmann, during her study in Berlin. So please, Charlotte, come.
Unmute.
Tocmai când vorbesc, Charlotte?
Yes, so thank you very much, Violeta, for that very kind invitation. Can you see my presentation?
Yes. Yes.
So yes, I just tried to start the first. It's not okay because it doesn't start at the beginning. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Yes, but we are not at the beginning.
Yes, at the beginning. The first slide.
So here we are. Yes, here's the beginning.
Okay.
So thank you, Violeta, for your kind introduction. I will speak about the compositorical process of music for orchestra of a piece, Essay on Shadow and Truth, which I wrote in the year 2007 and which had a premiere at the BBC Symphony Orchestra in London. So if you ask composers, this is a quite interesting question. If you go into the view of a creative process, what is the first creative impulse when you start to get into a piece, when you compose a piece? What is the first creative impulse which is leading you into the piece? So you will get very different answers from very different composers. Some of them say melody is the very first thing which is present, the first impulse, the first creative moment, which is then leading into a piece. Other composers say it's harmony, we have composers which are really completely grounded and founded by thinking in harmony, and they develop then everything which is coming then by the fundamental situation of harmony. You know that from traditional music. Rhythm is a point, you know that. Metrum is a point, you know that. Color is a point, you know that. Syntax is a point, you know that. Order is a point, you know that. And form may be a point. This is the traditional repertory of parameters, you know, from classical music. But now it's very interesting to have a look what is the creative impulse in the more experimental composing for composers like in my generation today. First quality may be sound, and if I speak now about sound, it means something very complex. In tradition, we have got the idea that sound is the color which you give a fixed pitch. If you have, for example, the pitch C or D or E, you give it the color of a trumpet, you give it the color of a violin. But today, in my personal way of composing, sound is something which is extremely more complex, because it does not only has the color of an instrument, it has as well a haptic quality. It has as well a complex texture, a haptic moment, the idea that you really can take the sound inside your hand and you feel how it is tasting, how it is smelling, how you can rub it in your hand, how you can feel it in your hand. So sound is, in my personal compositorical attitude, much more than only physical dimension. And then atmosphere is as well something which can be the creative impulse to start a piece. And it's as well a quality which is very close related to the idea of sound. Gesture is an idea which is very important. Behavior, musical behavior is an idea which is very important. And in a picture maybe is something which is leading you into the creative process of inventing a piece. So if you have a look at the next picture, which I just selected, you see a picture of nature, and this can be representative in the way of maybe experimental understanding of sound quality, like I, as a composer, personally in my aesthetics, receive sound. So if I think about sound, if I work on sound, I always have the feeling that the imagination, that sound is as complex as you can see it in the photo here, that it consists of a lot of microparticles, that it's a complex unity which is grounded on so many qualities, on so many dimensions, on so many parameters, which come together and which then bring out the quality of sound in its extremely individual behavior, in its extremely individual psychology, in its extremely individual inner picture. So now we will hear a short example of an orchestra piece. It's the piece Essay on Shadow and Truth. And I hope that I can now, I just must change here the system. Can you hear something?
Yes.
Yes.
So now I can't see you, but can you see me?
Yes.
Okay. So this was a short excerpt of the piece Essay and a Shadow and Truth. And finding a title is for me a very important point, which represents as well the way of process of composition and the way of what is my construction inside the piece. I can show it you on the next piece. If you have a look at the first impression essay, it means normally a short piece of writing on a particular subject and an attempt or effort. So the point is, we think about Thomas Mann. If we hear the word essay, we think about Robert Musil, we think about Romano Guardini, we think about Aldous Huxley. But the point is, the music is a musical form and it has no text. It has nothing to do with a literary process, with a literary form, with a literary approach. So I use with a great purpose, the open space by using the literary form for a musical content, which brings an overlapping of ambiguity, which brings an overlapping on aesthetic spaces, which then I can fill in with my imagination of sound. And the second part of the title, if you think about the part Shadow and Truth, the whole title is Essay and Shadow and Truth, you see that there's a special technique. Normally you would say shadow and light is the right correspondency and light and truth is the right correspondency. And here I cut it in the middle and I combine it the wrong way, in a special way. So shadow is combined with truth and the light is getting out. So if I speak about shadow and then the truth, it's clear that the truth has a little bit as well the element, the experience of light inside, and the shadow is as well implying something of the lie also. I do not tell about that. So this leads to the principle of artistic contradictions.
We cannot see a PowerPoint.
Can you see the PowerPoint?
No, no.
I can see it here. So I will go to the other technique again. So just try to
Thank you.
so why we can't get it here. Mitch, can you help me? How? Okay, just a moment. How to get again in the PowerPoint models?
Yeah, you can share also your audio if you press the button. There,
No, I don't want to show the audio. I'm still in the audio and I don't come back into the PowerPoint.
Yeah, maybe you stop sharing and then you start again.
Okay. So
It's still the media player.
yes, I don't come back to the media player, which I don't know anymore.
Do you have two screens or is it just one screen on your
Yes,
side?
I've two. Now I've got so just. So can you see something now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Slide. Yeah.
Then we are
Presentation.
right. Then we are at the right place,
Okay,
and
the
I go
second, yeah.
back.
Okay.
So here we had been.
Yes.
So this is the artistic contradiction, which is now interesting me. Essay as a literary genre is part of the title, but we speak about a musical genre. So of course we have got the ambiguity about that, which is opening a space, which is interesting me to play a role in the piece. The essay is a short form in literature, but now we have got a long form in the orchestra piece. The orchestra piece is has a duration of about 30 minutes. So it's as well artistic contradiction in that. And the third point is the crossing opposition of shadow and truth. I showed it in the construction here. You see that shadow and light would be the correspondency and lie and truth, but I cross it and I combine it in the other way. So this is the summary, the principle of conversion in the music, the externalization of contrasts, which is interesting me, it is configured in creative overlap. So we have got different systems, as you see here, which give contrast, but they are not on the same level. And if these contrasts, these contradictions get overlapped in the construction of the piece during the piece, it is getting me more and more possibility to have a grid of referring frames, which I then can fill with my imagination of sound. And that is the main point, the really imagination of the moment which is taking place in sound. Yeah, I just wanted to show you a part of my sketches. This is a part of the score of Essay on Shadow and Truth, we just have heard. And I write by hand. So it's very important for me that the process of writing by hand is giving me always as well the haptic awareness of where I am, the haptic awareness, the haptic relationship to the pencil, to the paper, and to the progress where I am. As well, this is an artificial excerpt of my handwriting, which is very important. And if I continue with a piece, I always paste the next page of the score at the end of a paper before. So I've got very, very, very long sheets, never ending, that I do not have the fear that the paper is ending when the haptic flowing over the paper with a pencil is going on. So thank you very much. This was the a short look in my compositorical process, which deals with the externalizations of contrasts on different structural layers, which always give me the grit to find the right point of imagination and to fill the things with my very own way of musical speaking. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. It's very good that you gave us also your mail address for the one who could be interested to come in touch with you. Now, you may also, we shall have questions for you at the end of the second lecture. So, and you may also put some questions in the chat, or you may also raise your hand for questions, but not now, after the second lecture. Please, Ioannis, may I ask you to
Yes, of
present?
course. Thank you, Violeta, and thank you, the speaker. Now we are coming to the second speaker, which is Costas Demetzos from Athens. He's a professor. Hello? He's a professor and works in the field of pharmaceutical nanotechnology, the Department of Pharmaceutics, National Capodistria University of Athens. And he's also the president of the Hellenic Pharmaceutical Association, a most respectable and also scientific association since 1874. His research focuses on the design and development of innovative nanocarriers based on their stimuli, responsiveness, bioinspiration, and their silent functionality profile due to their physicochemical memories and physical codes. He recently works on digital therapeutic approaches, combining nanotechnology and complexity in small systems. Costas has made several innovations. I will mention a few. He introduced the term biophysical disease factor in his monograph entitled Pharmaceutical Nanotechnology Fundamentals and Practical Applications, Springer, 2016, providing a new concept for designing and evaluating safe and effective new medicines and vaccines based on the biophysical and thermodynamic variables and measurements. He has also applied his ideas using nanoparticulate systems and liquid crystals as therapeutic nanosystems incorporating drugs, and recently focuses their application on neurodegenerative and cardiovascular diseases. He has introduced the concept of chimeric nanosystems as self-assembled nanocarriers of drugs controlling their pharmacokinetic profile, and also proposed that thermodynamics and biophysics could effectively be used as toolkits for evaluating biosimilars and the follow-up nanosimilar products. He has promoted the term thermodynamic epitopy, complementary to biological epitopy for digital therapies, and he supports the digital approaches to tame viruses that could be characterized as digital hackers, following the European Digital Innovation Hub's concept based on the Digital Europe program. So far, Professor Demetzos has more than 260 papers in peer-reviewed journals and numerous monographs, edited books. He has an H-index 48 and a lot of many citations, thousands of citations. He's a very active scientist with interdisciplinary and multi-scientific profile in his specialty of pharmaceutics, working in all the three sections of pharmaceutics, that is natural products chemistry, the pharmaceutical synthesis, and pharmaceutical technology and nanotechnology. The above remarkable achievements, as well as his dynamic scientific perspectives, confirm his interdisciplinary thinking, and I'm very pleased that Professor Costas Demetzos has been recently approved as a member of the European Academy of Science and Arts, and I'm glad to invite him to present his talk today. Costas.
Okay.
Is yours.
Thank you very much, Ioannis, for the kind introduction. Can you see my screen and changes of slide now?
We can see the first slide.
Just the first slide. You can see the next slide. No?
No.
Okay, so I will use slide by slide. So, okay. So thank you very much, Ioannis, for the introduction, and it is a great pleasure for me to participate in this colloquium. I would like to thank the President of the European Academy of Sciences and Arts, Professor Klaus Meiser, for being with us at tonight's event. And of course, I would like to thank the organizers, Professor Liritzis and Professor Dinescu, for inviting me to give a lecture on complex nanosystems and health science. I will focus on pharmaceutical nanotechnology, which is the field of my expertise. And I would like to point out that I am not expert on complexity and on complex systems, but in the past I realized that nanoparticles and nanodrug delivery systems belong to the complex systems, so it's good to study under the lens of complexity and nonlinear dynamics. So I will share with you my thoughts regarding the combination of nanomedicine, nanovaccines with the field of complexity. And I will start with a short introduction on what nano prefix and nanotechnology, nanomedicine mean. Nano is a unit prefix meaning 1 billionth, and this prefix denotes a factor of 10⁻⁹. According to Professor Gregoriadis, who is a pioneer in the field of pharmaceutical nanotechnology and wrote the introduction part of my monograph entitled Pharmaceutical Nanotechnology, Fundamental and Practical Applications, published by Springer, nano in Greek means dwarf. So nanotechnology is the engineering and manufacture of materials at the atomic and molecular scale and refers to structures in the 1 to 100 nanometer size in at least one dimension. And the applications of nanotechnology for treatment, diagnosis, monitoring, and control of biological systems is referred to as nanomedicine. So here you can see the point there, and we can see in this slide the scale of particles. For example, a water molecule, carbon nanotubes, and I will share with you in the next slides a huge number of nanoparticles that are able to incorporate bioactive molecules, viruses, red blood cells that belong to microscale, and diameter of human hair, length of housefly, and average 4-year-old child belong to macro scale. And this slide presents a typical molecule like aspirin, which is a low-weight drug with size diameter around to 1 nanometer. Viruses and bacterial have a size diameter around to from 100 nanometers to 1 micrometer, and finally red blood cells have a size diameter around to 7 micrometer. Stephen Hawking has called the century of complexity, and from my side it is obvious that we live in complex times. So in 2021, 3 scientists received the Nobel Prize in Physics for groundbreaking contributions to our understanding of complex physical systems. And recently, our academy organized a conference on causality and complexity in 2022. The questions that have been raised are, how shall we define a complex system? What is the relationship between emergence and complexity? And how shall we identify causal relationship in complex systems? All these questions have received a great deal of attention in science and philosophy. The relationship between causation and complexity remains to be understood. And now I would like to share with you some definition. What is a complex system? A complex system contains many interdependent constituents which interact non-linearly, and is a system with numerous components and interconnections, interactions, or interdependencies which are difficult to describe, understand, predict, manage, design, or change. And according to the literature, a small system is considered as a system which has a size diameter smaller than the range of the interaction of the forces acting on the system itself. At this point, I would like to remind you that there is a huge area between a bulk material, the molecules from which it consists, which is named as mesoscopic area. This mesoscopic area contains small systems, nanoparticulate systems. And these systems deviate from the classical laws of physics and of thermodynamics. And I would like to show you and to share with you the main difference between a complicated system and a complex system. For example, a car engine is composed of materials that can self-assemble. And on the other hand, a complex system, for example, an ant colony, is composed of individuals, ants, that can self-assemble and can produce complex and functional structures, providing new morphologies and new functionalities. Self-assembly is a great undiscovered principle of nature, and complexity itself triggers self-assembly, and that if enough different molecules pass a certain threshold of complexity, they begin to self-organize in new morphologies, they can produce new functionalities. And I would like to share with you a video, a short video, which presents the self-assembly process of a well-known, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's interrupted. Look,
Yes.
Jamadin, he says it would be easier to see the slides.
So I'm here. And I will start from the beginning. So here is the slide that I would like to show you. And here is a short video. This video.
But we do not see, we see you. We see now your face.
Oh, sorry. Right, I'm confused. Okay, so, okay, I will share screen again. Okay. Okay, can you see the screen now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, but the video doesn't work. Okay, so you can see the video now. I think it works. So we can see well-known biomolecules like phospholipids. I remind you that phospholipids are the main components of our cell membranes. They are composed of hydrophilic head and the hydrophobic tail. So by dissolving such molecules in water, they come close to each other and can produce domains. Due to the van der Waals interactions, these nanodomains can construct a lipid bilayer, which is similar to our cell membrane. We can see here this lipid bilayer composed of phospholipids and the aqueous core that can accommodate hydrophilic molecules. So this is the self-assembly process, which is an amazing process in nature, and we can use such structures which belong to the nanoscale as drug delivery system that can incorporate bioactive molecules and transport them to the target tissues. So in order to understand and show how the complexity of the system is impacted by the complexity of its environment, 3 layers of complexity are defined. The first one is the internal complexity. This is serious because the internal complexity and the internal morphology of nanoparticles is very important and affect the behavior of such system. And I will explain in the next slides what I mean. The external complexity is the complexity of the environment of the system and affects the internal complexity of the system by changing experimental conditions like pH or temperature. We can affect the behavior and the functionality of the nanosystem. And finally, the interface complexity, which is defined as at the interface of the system and its environment. And now it is obvious for me that nature is complex and is related to the morphology of the biological entities. Pythagoras of Samos was an Ionian Greek philosopher, referred to the complex systems and in the universe harmony and their relation with the human being. The role of morphology is very important to design and to develop new nano platforms that are functional and beneficial to the healthcare. So we can produce nano devices with new morphologies depending on the internal morphology and of the external conditions that are able to incorporate bioactive compounds and to transport drugs to the target tissues. And we can see here an example, for example, proteins which are composed of amino acids. The sequence and the morphological characteristics, meaning the conformational properties of amino acids, affect the functionality, the behavior of protein. For example, the spike protein of SARS-CoV-2 is a good example, I think, and all we know that there are mutants and variants due to the changes of the sequence of amino acids and the conformational properties of the amino acids from which the spike protein consists. And here you can see in this slide a figure, images that have been taken by using cryo-TEM transition electron microscopy, which is a technique belonging to the electronic microscopy. And we can see complex artificial nanoscale drug delivery systems that are composed of dendrimers and nanohosts. Dendrimers is the 4th class of polymers. And what we can see here the cavities and the internal morphology. You can see the pointer of such structures that can incorporate bioactive molecules. And I will move on now to the complexity of artificial complex biosystems at nanoscale. Here we can see an artificial structure which mimic the functionality of our cells. And this nanoparticle is composed of amphiphilic molecules, for example, phospholipids or polymeric molecules that self-assembled and produce a complex structure. We can see drugs that can incorporate into the aqueous core of such structure, as well as drugs that can interact with the surface of this structure. And you can see some abnormalities due to the interaction process. And I will speak in the next slide about these abnormalities, which are characterized as rafts or metastable phases, very important, depending on their nature. So here is another morphology, another picture, which have been taken by using cryo-TEM transition electron microscopy, and these structures have been produced in my lab, the University of Athens. What you can see here, you can see the long-range order, meaning the external morphology of such structure, which is different structure by structure. And we can see also the internal morphology and the complexity. And this structure is composed of channel and water. These artificial complex bio-nanostructures are able to incorporate bioactive molecules for therapeutic purposes. And here is another nice image which present cubic structures, which are composed of amphiphilic molecules like glycerol monolate and oleic acid. And we use also a stabilizer for stabilizing the external morphology, the long-range order. And we can see the internal morphology, which is very complex, composed of channels. All these structures are able to incorporate bioactive molecules for therapeutic purposes, and some other self-assembled complex nanoparticles like polymer micelles, polymerosomes composed of polymers, liposomes composed of phospholipids, cholesterol, niosomes, and cubosomes. And we can see the complexity of these structures that are able could be used for drug delivery systems, incorporating small molecules, peptides, proteins, or even nucleic acids. This is an amazing figure which presents lipid nanoparticles. Lipid nanoparticles can deliver mRNA. This type of nanoparticles have been used to incorporate mRNA for producing vaccines against SARS-CoV-2. So these morphological characteristics and the variation of these structures depend on the biomaterials that have been used for producing lipid nanoparticles, and we have published from my lab such structure and such ideas. And I move on to the next slide. As I mentioned, complex systems are composed of different in nature biomaterials that can produce nanodevices. And due to their complexity, such nanostructures can respond to external stimuli and alter the behavior of nanoparticles. They can alter the pharmacokinetic properties, meaning the release profile of the encapsulated drug, the stability of the drug, the stability of the particle, and finally, the biological stability of the whole system. And here you can see images which represent a polymer. Here is a simple polymer and a D-block copolymer, and they are conformational changes due to the external stimulus. For example, by changing temperature or pH or ionic strength, we can have different conformational properties and consequently different functionality of the final system. Such structures are able to change their conformational properties and consequently their entropic state. It is important to point out that such changes take place in nature through biopolymers such as proteins, peptides, that are stimuli responsive to experimental conditions. This state fit nicely to the variants and mutants of the spike protein of SARS-CoV-2. Different environmental conditions can change the sequence and the conformation properties of amino acids and consequently the final behavior of the spike protein. According to the literature, Lammers states that nature processes are so beautiful that they could be considered art rather than smart achievements of science that mimics biological processes. The beauty of nature and its processes are the highest art form due to the complexity of the natural processes that lead the beauty. Complexity leads beauty and art are the natural processes. For my side and in my point of view, it is important to point out that the internal complexity and morphology of bio, like cells and artificial nanostructures in order to be promoted as new carriers of drugs and therapeutic agents is very important. And here you can see three structures. The long-range order is similar, is cubic, but we can see that the internal morphology is different between A, B, C. That means we can use different internal morphologies of the same external morphology in order to promote different functionalities. For example, different interaction profile with our cells, different pharmacokinetic properties, meaning the release profile of the encapsulating drug, different stability during the storage conditions of these nanoparticles. So it is important to study in depth the internal morphology of such structures. And I would like to show you an amazing publication entitled Self-Assembled Multi-Compartment Liquid Crystalline Lipid Carriers for Protein, Peptide, and Nucleic Acid Delivery, which belong to complex systems. And what we can see by seeing carefully this publication, such structures can be identified by using high-quality techniques like ZACs, meaning X-ray scattering techniques, a high-resolution fractional electron microscopy in order to study the morphology and the dynamic topological transition of these structures. And here you can see patterns of lipid cubic lattices with large A and normal B water channels. And here you can see the peaks that correspond each one to different morphologies and different complexities that can be detected by using XRD, X-ray techniques, and we can detect such metastable, intermediate, and coexisting structures. I will show you what I mean by saying metastable phases, which are very important and promote the functionality of complex nanosystems. What is a complex metastable phase? A complex metastable phase is a particular portion or a raft, let's say, of a cell or of an artificial membrane. And here we can see amphiphilic molecules that can be organized as a lipid bilayer, but suddenly, due to an external factor, for example, by changing the temperature or whatever, another organization is occurred, which is characterized as raft or metastable phase. By using fluorescent microscopy images, we can show crystalline in red and liquid in blue metastable phases of artificial cell membranes. So fluorescent microscopy is a nice technique that we can detect such metastable phases. But in my view, the most important technique is thermal analysis techniques. Thermodynamics is well known, that is an amazing tool that could efficiently be used in order to study and analyze such metastable phases of artificial cell membranes. And what you can see here, you can see three different peaks. Each one corresponds to different organizations, to different rafts. And here is another example, another thermogram by differential scanning calorimetry, and we can see different curves with different shape. For example, the red one, which is composed of D-lake phosphatidylcholine, which is a phospholipid very common in our cell membranes, we can see a normal shape. By adding another compound, for example, a polymer in different concentration, we can see here are the metastable phases. So differential scanning calorimetry is an amazing technique. And here is the peaks. We can see here metastable phases that correspond to different abnormalities on the surface of our cells or of an artificial cell membrane. So the metastable phases that I mentioned, the lipid rafts, could be considered as information hubs. So these abnormalities can carry information, and we can use such abnormalities in order to be used for therapeutic purposes, or can be characterized as biophysical disease factors. So I would like to point out that these metastable phases and the rafts are very important for therapeutic purposes or for identifying disease factors. So all these metastable phases that I mentioned of lipidic-based nanomedicines are considered as complex thermodynamic epitopes. And in my view, I prefer this term, thermodynamic epitope, and I will show you in the next slide the definition of a thermodynamic epitope versus a biological epitope. So what is a biological epitope? It is well known and it's common knowledge that a biological epitope is a macromolecule or a protein on the surface of biological membranes. These biological epitopes can be mapped using protein microarrays and biotechnological techniques. What is a thermodynamic epitope? A thermodynamic epitope can be found on artificial cell membranes and can be mapped using thermal analysis, electron microscopy, and X-ray techniques. So a thermodynamic epitope is a complex system, a complex metastable phase. It is not a bioepitope, and it represents the thermotropic behavior of a real biological epitope, which could be found on the surface of our cells. And this biological epitope contributes to a particular biochemical cascade which could be relevant with a particular disease. So a thermodynamic epitope is a very complex, dynamic nanораft far from the equilibrium state. So by mapping the thermodynamic behavior of a biological epitope, meaning that we can identify the thermodynamic variables and transport them to a nanoparticle, we can be characterize this nanoparticle as a thermodynamic epitope. So we can produce artificial thermodynamic epitopes carrying the thermodynamic variables of a real biological epitope. Recently, I have posted in LinkedIn a question: can we develop artificial nanoplatforms as carriers of thermodynamic variables that could contribute in curing neuro and immune disease? And I published such thoughts in a handbook on computational neurodegeneration edited by Panagiotis Vlamos. And here I would like to show you a video which represents the behavior of a thermodynamic epitope. Here is my publication entitled Nanoplatforms as Information Carriers and Thermodynamic Epitopes in Neuro and Immunodiseases. I hope that this video works. Okay. I believe that you can see the video. This video presents an artificial or a real cell membrane and decorated with biological epitopes, meaning proteins. And this is the structure of a nanoparticle that has on the surface thermodynamic variables in a red spot. And what we will expect to see interaction of the thermodynamic epitopes with biological epitopes due to the same thermodynamic variables. This approach, this interaction can interrupt a biochemical cascade which can promote a disease. And this is an amazing idea, but this paper, which has been published by Binder, I think that is very nice. And what we can learn from this paper, the first one is that the main components of our cell membranes, lipid bilayers, are phospholipid, glycerolipids, and cholesterol, and all these biomembranes are complex systems. Domains in membranes, the paper states, are implicated in the molecular pathology of numerous diseases such as cancer, atherosclerosis, neurodiseases, and AIDS. So strong evidence points to the conclusion that human immunodeficiency virus, the well-known HIV virus, buds through lipid rafts. Virus budding is a key step in the infection from all enveloped viruses. Moreover, the HIV lipid bilayer is enriched in cholesterol and sphingolipids. We well know that cholesterol and sphingolipids in high amount can produce raft and metastable phases. And viruses like HIV, even SARS-CoV-2, may use raft domains to the host cell to start the infection process. Okay, here is another short video which represents the lipid bilayer of sour cell membranes composed of cholesterol, glycoprotein, carbohydrate, and so on. And nature, I have to say that, and it is well known, that nature promotes complexity through metastable phases or lipid rafts. You can see the movement now of the artificial cell membranes. And all these are equilibrium thermodynamic processes of high quality, for example, signal transduction. So our cell membrane can use these metastable phases in order to promote very serious processes. So I think that that's work. I move on to the next slide because there is a problem. Summing up, complex metastable phases exist in innovative nanodrug delivery systems and considered as complex events in a non-equilibrium state. Reproducing the complex metastable phases of biological epitope by constructing artificial metastable phases on the nanodimension, we can create smart nanodevices that are able to mimic living cell metastable phases and can act as thermodynamic epitopes. And now, moving to the end of my talk, I would like to say some words on complexity in pharmaceutical nanotechnology. Here is some types of nanosystems that are used in order to transport bioactive molecules, for example, liposomes, polymeric micelles, dendrimers, and called nanoparticles, quantum dots. All this structure increase the solubility of the encapsulated molecules. Drugs can increase the targeting process, reduce the toxicity. They are all biocompatible. They can increase the physicochemical stability. They can control the drug release. They have stealth properties, meaning that they help nanoparticles to avoid immunosystem, and all are biodegradable. And 2 or 3 examples of complex nanosystems, nanomedicines that are already in market. The first one is Calyx and Myoset. These 2 nanomedicines are already in market. They are used against cancer. They are composed of complex liposomal nanostructures incorporating a toxic drug which is named doxorubicin. And another example is Ambisome, which is liposomal amphotericin B. Amphotericin B is a toxic drug molecule, but incorporating into liposome, we can reduce the toxicity of this drug. The most important thing is that the complexity of such structures like liposomes or lipid nanoparticles is an obstacle for producing copies, identical copies, or the well-known generic products of nanomedicines, which are named as nanosimilars. However, nanosimilars are considered as complex and difficult to reproduce new medicinal outcome because of the complexity of the carrier of the drug, of the liposomes of lipid nanoparticles. And some words concerning the complexity of virus SARS-CoV-2 and the internal morphology. Here we can see a cartoon of virus SARS-CoV-2 decorated with a huge number of proteins. The most important protein is well-known spike glycoprotein, which prefers to interact with the ACE2 receptors on the cell surface and make the infection. And we have published a paper in the proceedings of the European Academy of Science and Arts entitled Perspectives to Fight Viruses, the Example of SARS-CoV-2. In this article, we aim that SARS-CoV-2 belongs to a complex system, and its evolution and mutation must be observed under the lens of non-linearity, and they are far from the equilibrium conditions. So, coming to the end, I would like to give you the main difference between liposomes and lipid nanoparticles. Liposomes are used to incorporate simple drugs like doxorubicin, aspirin, whatever, and are already in market. But lipid nanoparticles are more complex system in terms of their internal complexity. And here you can see the pioneers in the field of pharmaceutical nanotechnology, Professor Alec Banham, and two Greek pioneers, scientists, Professor Gregoriadis and Professor Papahadzopoulos. Lipid nanoparticles, LNPs, which are used in order to produce vaccines against SARS-CoV-2, can be considered as modified liposomes in terms of their pleiotropic internal morphology and complexity. And we have other examples like influenza virus and vaccines that are used against influenza virus. It is well known that influenza virus is composed of a capsid and decorated with essential proteins like hematogglutenin and neuroaminidase. By constructed liposomes or lipid nanoparticles and decorated such structure with hematogglutenin and lipid and neuroaminidase, we can produce virusomes, which are the vaccines against influenza virus. And the new technology regarding nanotechnology is the vaccines, which has been produced by the pharmaceutical company Novavax, and the technology named as recombinant nanotechnology, and use the concept of pleiotropism and taking into consideration the internal morphology and the complexity of the final product. It is obvious that without these nanostructures, complex nanostructures, there would be no mRNA vaccines against SARS-CoV-2. And in my view, there are two main directions in research and innovation in the field of health. The first one is the genetic approach, and the second one is nanotechnology. And some words regarding art and beauty at nanoscale. In my view, most of novel bio-nanomaterials, nanostructures are art rather than smart. This because they generally are highly complex formulations, difficult to synthesize and scale up in a controllable and reproducible manner. And Gustav Major was a German artist and political activist who developed the concept of auto-destructive art and the art strike, and he initiated the destruction in art symposium which took place in 1966. Here you can see paintings produced by using liquid crystals, meaning nanoparticulate systems, and by changing the external environmental conditions in this liquid crystal painting, for example, temperature or light, the interface complexity is the driving force for the final art outcome. And moving to the end, here is the final slide. It is an imaginary landscape of beauty and complexity based on dendritic nanostructures by the artist, Greek artist Angela Fragou. What you can see here, dendrimers, as I mentioned, are the fourth generation of polymers, and you can see an amazing imaginary landscape composed of dendrimers. And finally, I would like to promote my book, which is published, which is recently published. This book includes basic scientific objectives and terms that are related with the living cell and the life in macrocosm. It is a scientific conversation between physical and biological laws in microcosm and macrocosm, and presents the interfacial phenomena between the complex micro, macro, and megacosmos that we are living. Finally, I would like to thank you all for your kind attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Costas. It was bombarded, you know, with many information of microcosmos and microparticles and nanoparticles, sorry, in the microcosmos anyway, which one needs time, you know, to absorb, you know, and to put in order. But I hope that in the coming discussion, probably some things will be elucidated. Dear Violeta, I would like to ask you to lead the questions for both the speakers, please.
Thank you very much for this virtuosity tonight. So I would like to invite you for commentary or questions. You could also for Charlotte Seither, our first lecture, and you can put also in chat your questions if you would like prefer to do this. Please, I would be very happy if you could begin. I have to discover if somebody has. Okay. Charlotte, would you like to tell you something? Because I see your hand.
Yes, many thanks, Costas. I really liked your lecture, especially to the picture you showed, and which had quite, for me, a relationship to the things I talked about. So it's interesting that you speak about beauty and the point that complexity which leads to beauty. So my question is, what worth is beauty in your subject? So of course, as artist, as I am, beauty is extremely important for me. But what does beauty mean for you in your subject? And if I have a look at beauty in my view, it has a lot to do with, for example, symmetries or things like that. And of course, in contemporary music, we just try to find other ways of beauties. We do not like to cling to symmetry. We look to beauties which are behind that. What would you say to that?
But sorry, but I think we start with questions to you.
Exactly. So we can
and not to the second
question.
speaker.
So look,
Doesn't matter now. Let us do this, and then we go to the other way around.
Okay,
now,
I have something in chat.
Stop, you know, this flow of thought.
Okay, good.
Okay. So it is. Thank you, Charlotte, for the kind words and for the question. From my view, I think that research in the area of nanotechnology, by default, is a beauty behavior. But trying to understand the behavior of invisible nanoparticles using techniques that are used to identify objects in macrocosm, I think that is a way to understand the natural processes which are art and beauty, of course. And in order to understand what happens in nature in an invisible world, we have to have a philosophical point of view. Differently, we can't see the beauty in microcosmos and nanocosmos because all scientists prefer to understand research by using just metrics. Overcoming such approach, we can see the beauty and the art at nanoscale. This is my view, and I encourage all scientists to see in depth the beauty and the art and not only the metrics in their research.
Thank you very much. It was so enthusiastic reaction of Charlotte, because
Yes.
indeed there is a correspondence between you tonight.
Yeah,
So
yes.
please, Klaus,
Therefore,
you are asking now, and then we have something in chat from Ioannis.
Therefore,
Okay.
my question is exactly the way back to you, Charlotte Seither. Namely, I wanted to ask you, you nicely described the emergence of complex structures of sounds and tones, and it reminds me on fluid dynamics. And so my question is, way back from your question, just in the other direction, did you consider the modeling of complex systems in the natural sciences? Because, for example, you spoke about parameters of the creative process, and there was enumeration of some of these criteria, and that reminds me on complex systems dynamics, because that is also characterized by a list of parameters, and then we have control parameters at critical points, and then the patterns change in critical situations, and they are modeled by so-called order parameters. The order parameters describe mathematically the kind of complexity of the structures, equilibrium states, oscillating states, or, for example, even chaotic states. And they emerge at critical points of the, for example, fluid dynamics. You can observe that in a river on the surface, the different structures, chaotic or flat and equilibrium state, and things like that. So the question is, did you consider that? I think it would be very inspiring for your kind of making and creating music.
So thank you very much, Klaus Mainzer, for that wonderful relationship to the other physical system. I didn't consider that because I'm not a scientist at all. So everything I do, I just do without knowing natural sciences. But the more fascinating point of me is the more I go through nature, the more I discover the principles of my way of composition. And the interesting thing is that I'm not aware of that, but the more I get in contact with the natural sciences, the more I learn about the things I naturally do without being aware of that. But that's a very important principle of making art, not really being conscious of everything you do. You are conscious onto a lot of things, and of course you enlarge your consciousness more and more and more and more. But it's extremely important that there is still a secret as well for yourself as the person who writes a piece in the things which happen when you do it. And I think that's the difference between art and sciences. But it's extremely beautiful to get this kind of exchange, and it's extremely beautiful to learn from the natural sciences.
Wonderful, okay. Charlotte. So you are reacting like with your instinct, and you are vibrating with such strong ideas, natural sciences, strong ideas.
To Charlotte Seither, but I couldn't see how to raise my hand.
Marisa, we have a question in the chat. I would like, and then please remain. I would like to ask Charlotte is a question of Ioannis Dor.
Yes, after.
Do you orientate?
Yes, I wait, of course.
But wait, please. So, do you orientate to the works about modern notation, or do you try to find personal types of notation to create a personal musical expression or musical color? what is most important for you about your work, the idea, the process of composing, or the final result? Because your explanation gives me the feeling that the composition by itself is a very important, the composing itself is a very important and intense part of your work. So, Charlotte, please answer, and then Marisa Dalla Chiara will ask you also.
Yes. The first question about the notation is something composers always consider about, because notation is always such a poor tool. If you compose, of course, everything you imagine is so much richer in brain than things you can notate. So you always have the problem that the notation isn't precise enough, doesn't cover the parameters you really want to press, doesn't give doesn't express the psychology which you really mean. So normally we notate pitches, for example, but the point is, how do you get in the pitch? How do you stay on the pitch? How do you behave on being on the pitch? And how do you leave the pitch? It's not notatable. And we have, if we look in the history, for example, in Baroque times, we have so wonderful musical practices of how people perform music in a way which is not notated, but we have got the oral tradition of that if they see some things they are used to practice, you interpret it in a special way, which is going over the notation. So I'm always working on finding a notation which is more close to the sound result, which I'm looking for. So I always have to find new signs of notation, new principles. I always write by hand, so it's easier as well to paint things, to define things myself. I think that they may be helpful, but it's the general problem for me. For other composers, it's different. That notation is always something very, very poor if you compare it with the spirit, with the imagination, with the idea of the piece, which is the more important and which cannot be really built, really get precise in the score. But in a special way, you have as well this problem with Beethoven and Mozart. If you really play Mozart well, you do so much more things than the things which are notated. So musicians always have that problem that they must think over that, what is just the tool of notation. And the second point was, I think you're absolutely right with the point that the process of composition for me is a very important part. I'm not only interested in the result, so the process of composition is a very important point, which then is going to that special result, which is at the end. And when the score is ready, I often forget the way which how I could reach the piece before. But when I'm then practicing with musicians, a lot of things of the composing process come back. So if you're a composer, it's always the way is as well important so often for you personally than the process, than the end of the piece.
Thank you, Charlotte. Ioannis Dörr, he was also composing, so it was important for him to your answer. Please, Marisa Dalla Chiara, you would like to ask Charlotte something?
Yes, I have been deeply impressed by your correlation between shadow and truth. It seems to me that this is very interesting also from a logical point of view. It is well known that the traditional, the classical concept of truth is connected with sharpness, if you want, with light, from Aristotle to Tarski. But in this respect, the situation has been deeply changed in contemporary logic, because there are many trends in contemporary logic, from fuzzy logic to quantum logic and so on, that have established a connection between truth and ambiguity, if you want, between truth and shadow. And these trends perhaps maybe also used for a formal analysis of music. Anyway, my question to you is the following. Do you think that these forms of shadow, of ambiguity, are a very important feature of contemporary music, or are also important features, for instance, of romantic music or post-romantic music? Let us think of Schubert, Brahms, Wagner, Mahler, and so on. I remember that Daniel Barenboim, in his writings, has very often stressed the importance of ambiguity in music. It seems to me in any form of music, but especially in the case of romantic and post-romantic music. I remember his deep analysis of the opera Tristan und Isolde. So what do you think about this problem? Is this shadow very important in contemporary music, or perhaps also in classical music, in Mozart, and then in romantic and post-romantic music?
Many thanks, Marisa, for that wonderful question. I really like it. I really like it so much because you really meet a point I'm thinking so much about, the ambiguity. I think it's so much more interesting than just to have the clear contrast. The clear contrast between black and white isn't really interesting after Sigmund Freud. And we need, after Sigmund Freud, other ways of showing the light and showing the shadow. And nothing is really what we seem that it is. There is no real white which really exists, which does not have any shadow. We just don't see it. We just don't understand it. We just are not aware of that. But after Sigmund Freud and after so many other points in our history, in our cultural history, the ambiguity is the more interesting point, and the point which is more leading to new development and new spaces for people to find their own development of things. So ambiguity for myself is playing a very large role. It's a central word on which I'm thinking since years. So many thanks that you quoted it out. And if you ask me about Schubert, I'm quite sure that Schubert was much more related to ambiguity than we today are aware of. And the reason is exactly that. If you have the ambiguity, we include the secret. We include the possibility that it could be completely the opposite of what we see. We include the possibilities of brain, of intelligence, of imagination, of all the things we always have when we humans have a view on anything in nature or in culture. So I have a very clear answer on your very wonderful question.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I think Ioannis,
Yes.
you invite Costas Demetzos.
There is another question in the chat.
Oh, yeah?
Hannes Door, yes. To
No, I just read
Seither,
it.
to the Charlotte Seither.
This question, I read it.
I read it, sorry. Okay.
For Charlotte.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you so much for your commentary and your answers.
Yeah, I would like to ask Charlotte, what about the other duetto in your four, valuable meaning words, sad to truth? What about light and lies? Have you thought of approaching this as well?
Yes, Ioannis, I have thought about that as well, but it wasn't so interesting for me. It was too maybe that shadow and truth was for me the most interesting, because it's more, so the level is breaking. And if we think about light and lie, I do not like the light. I do not like too much light on the music and in the music, because it makes things not interesting in the sense of ambiguity we just spoke about. So I personally prefer more the shattering randoms of colors and the shattering randoms of the forms and the shattering randoms of that. Clearness and light is not my preference. Pardon, but I understand your question, and of course you're completely right that in the logical thinking as well, the truth and the light would be
exactly.
The lie and the light would be very interesting to correspond together, and to see how is the lie getting an ambiguity if we put the light on, and how is the light getting
the truth.
Yes. How is the light changing if it's confronted with the lie?
Light and truth goes together, you know.
Yes.
But anyway, I would like as I'm listening, you know, to both of you, and I recall in a couple of colloquia in the past of this series, you know, that the question of what is beauty has been emerged, you know, always, and if there is any common definition, or is it relative? Anything, everyone, you know, takes it as he or she thinks, because what is a combination of qualities? Is a shape, color, form, for example, and especially beauty for the sight or for the listening, or for which one of the senses, you know, and also what are the elements of beauty? Many philosophers, of course, and in the medieval times and in antiquity have worked on this. So still we use easily the word beauty. This is not beauty, this is beauty, but essentially I cannot accept, you know, so easily to use in our speaking, you know, about something, the word beauty without a definition. So Thomas Aquinas, as you know, says beautiful has proportion, clarity, integrity. Somebody says must be geometry and symmetry. Okay, I would like to hear both of you. You know, how do you think about that?
Yes, Ioannis, it's a very interesting question, because if you ask composers or artists general of what is beauty for them, you can quite clear see where they are standing in the field of what they do. If you ask me, I would cling to Marisa and say beauty is for me if the way of ambiguity is the most interesting I can find.
Be good. Okay. So we defined it with another, through other, you know, other meaning of other words. Okay.
So in this way, beauty for me, if you ask me, it's not only an aesthetical dimension. If I look at the art and it's just beautiful, it's not enough. There must be something which is really making the spirit visible, which is inside. And ambiguity, if we speak about ambiguity, you must always have more than only eyes in your face. You always must use the brain, and you always must think with so many more dimensions about that. So
more dimensions. You're
yes.
Right.
So yeah. Ambiguity is for me the right word to define beauty. Not each ambiguity, I would say, would create beauty for me, but beauty isn't possible. It's not possible for me if I'm missing ambiguity.
Yeah. So that is related to the ignorance, probably, of comprehension.
The ignorance
Ambiguity.
of what?
Of comprehension.
Complication.
To comprehend, you know, something. It gives goes to the ambiguity, which ambiguity and the spiritual, let us say, some spiritual element gives, you know, the beauty, according to you.
Sorry, I didn't understood it now, your thesis. Could you just repeat it?
It is to ignore ignorance, you know.
Yes.
Not knowledge. We don't know. We don't have the the knowledge of something. We ignore something. So we are it is something ambiguous. We are not sure. So because we are not sure, if I take it ambiguity like that, that means lack of knowledge.
No, I think there's a difference. So ambiguity is not a lack of knowledge. Ambiguity is that there's an A and there's an B. There's a shadow and there's a truth. And there's always a Schwingung between. There's always a vibration between. So you cannot really put it in this box or this box. You always have got the vibration between the different things. That is ambiguity for me. It's not the lack of knowledge.
Okay, so it resembles to a frequency, to vibrations, you said, and a kind of measuring the vibrations, how to say, the frequency, you know, of these two things, something which is between, you know, the one that is a complex system.
Yes.
Okay.
Like you have shadow and truth. This is an ambiguity, and you feel that there are vibrations between because it's not the same level. There's the cut between. So this is the kind of ambiguity which I mean, which causes for me as well beauty and satisfaction as a human being, because I can get in relationship with my experiences, with my brain, with my with everything I know.
So that introduces the meaning of order. System is ordered. There is an order between the one and the other, and which order comes from nature.
Yes,
natural phenomena.
And that was the point which was fascinating me very much, Costas, on your presentation, because I liked so much the pictures we could see, and the most beautiful pictures were not the perfect ones for me, if you ask me. There were always that one which had that kind of ambiguity. And so my thinking is, as an artist I am, if I look on beauty or on ambiguity, it's the thing I ask for. It's my job to be on the search of beauty and ambiguity. But what do you do if you meet beauty in your job? It's not the final result to find beauty. It's the final result to find scientific, interesting things. What do you do if you meet beauty?
Violeta, can I say something?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. I would like to say
ask questions to the second speaker, I think, too.
Okay, no problem.
Do we forget that? The questions to the second speaker. Now there was a question to the first speaker, but what about the second speaker?
Okay, President, I'm ready.
There must also be questions to him.
Okay, so for my point of view, I make a note here. Beauty is what I can see, but what we sense. In other words, meaning that uncertainty is the beauty, and according to my research, the uncertainty of many phases, of rafts, and all these phenomena that already exist on the surface of our cells, of human being, are considered as beauty and art in my view.
So coronavirus is a beauty?
Coronavirus, not
Yes,
absolutely the coronavirus,
it is.
the SARS-CoV-2, but the phenomena that exist take into account, into consideration the nature of SARS-CoV-2. We can consider as a beautiful and amazing structure that infect us, but we can recognize on its surface or its behavior, on its complexity, of course, the beauty.
If you do not know that that is the structure of a virus, you would be delighted by this kind of structure. Yes, and that is the interesting point of complex systems and the emergence and self-assembly. I will not speak more about beauty because let me mention that this evening I wrote a book, perhaps you can see it, in 2003, Symmetry and Complexity, the Spirit and Beauty of Nonlinear Science. And nonlinear science, that was presented by Costas Demetzos this evening. I have a very short question to you. It is obvious today we have the mathematical formalism to model all these kind of emergences of complex structures on the nanoscale and in the molecular world. But that is modeling, and that is done in the natural sciences. But you are also interested in the technological side, and that means nanotechnology. And pharmacy is technology. That means you want to construct molecules, not only model. You want to construct models for molecules for certain purposes. For example, complex structures of molecules as containers of drugs. That is a possibility. Or artificial cells, whatsoever. Now, I remember in the past, Drexler, whom I mentioned in the beginning, who had wide-reaching visions. In the end, the molecular world seemed to be like a Lego play. You know, by Lego building blocks, you can construct everything. But that is not true, because nowadays we know the limitations of this kind of structuring. So my question to you is, where are the frontiers? Where are the limitations of constructing? Because there are strange forces, we do not know them in this nano world, which does not allow to construct everything. What are the limitations? What is your impression as expert in that field?
So thank you very much. Very impressive question, Professor Manager. Starting from the beginning, I have to point out that by constructing small molecules by using synthesis is a conventional approach, and I think that a huge number of scientists and pharmaceutical industry spend more and more time in order to construct more and efficient molecules. But this is the drug. We are talking about medicine. Medicine is the combination of a drug with a carrier, with an excipient. So by combining excipient, conventional excipient like sugars or whatever, with drugs, we can produce conventional medicine. Now we are talking about innovative medicine, which demand to produce innovative excipients. And in my view, and my work oriented into produce innovative excipient like nanostructure, nanoparticulate systems. And all these systems are complex systems. And we have to study all these systems by using by using tools coming from other disciplines like mathematics, like physics, like biology, like artificial intelligence. So we have drugs, we have peptides, we have proteins, we have nucleic acid, but alone they can't promote therapy. We have to have carriers of these all impressive molecules. So my view is to spend more time and funding and efforts to understand the complexity of carriers. And the most important carriers are at nanoscale for more and more reasons. So I think that this
Te sun mai târziu, sunt acum într-o din asta online. Te sun eu în 10 minute.
So, okay. So I think that the challenge is to spend money in funding such approaches in order to explore the possibility to construct new and innovative excipients, let's say, in order to incorporate conventional toxic lipophilic compounds or even genetic materials. So by working on this subject, see the art and the beauty in nature. And we need philosophical approaches to understand and to become better and better scientists in order to produce effective therapeutic products. This is my view.
Thank you.
Excuse me that I interrupted you with responding to, please excuse me. There is two questions in the chat. But first, Klaus, would you like to say something, to react?
No, that was wonderful. That was the point. Namely, how far can we go in technology nowadays with these nanotechnology? By the way, that's a very practical background in my case. We have now a sponsor. You are members of the Senate and you know that. And there will be in the next festive plenary the appointment of a honorary senator. And his field is nanotechnology.
Wow.
And so nanotechnology is very exciting, especially for our academy. And the question is, that was my question to our experts this evening, in pharmacy, and our honorary senator is an expert in nanomaterials using for cleaning water. Yeah. And that's very exciting nowadays, these practical nanotechnologies. It's not only modeling in a philosophical sense, nature and self-organization, a self-assembly, what was mentioned in the beginning, very nice, very beautiful, but nowadays very practical. How far can we go with the practical applications of this kind of insights in the complex structure of the molecular world? And that was a very good answer, and that is all from my side. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. So please, we have in chat a commentary from Katja Grönke concerning the coronavirus beauty. Maybe better aesthetic. Nature is not judging, but the term beauty does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool. I agree.
Yeah. Would you like to react to this commentary?
I think I would like to suggest, now I tried to find a book all times. I had it in my library here, which is entitled Thinking in Complexity, the Complex Dynamics of Matter, Mind, and Mankind. Klaus Meinzer. I have it here as a Bible. Long time, in end 2000, I think I got it. Anyway, it gives a very nice account of, very good account, you know, of everything what we are thinking in a simple way and well received, and I fully recommend it. Anyway, so we go on with any more questions apart of that which is in the chat. I think nobody reacts.
Ioannis, there is in the chat also, I would like to read from Katika Kulakova.
Yes.
Poetry and music are very close in that sense. I understand well Charlotte Seither and congratulate her. And she said also, the ambiguity does not mean ignorance or absence of meaning. Of the contrary, on the contrary, it means existence of double and triple meanings at the same time. The language of art, poetry, and music becomes metaphysical and produce unusual states of mind, of soul, of spirit.
Well, with philosophical contemplations, we can go on and on and on, I suppose. And great minds, you know, 1,000 years ago, they have worked on this and still we're working on that to find the light or the truth, inverted commas. So any more questions?
Look if we have, or commentary.
Yeah, no commentary.
Do we, I just look, but I don't see.
No, I don't see anything.
Anything? I look also in
Violeta,
the
you
chat.
can close the colloquium since you will start the next one. Ladies first, ladies first.
It's a little abrupt now. So thank you so much. We had a very interesting evening, and I think it could be long, it could be not longer. And thank you so much also for the questions. And I hope we see you again in the next semester.